So good afternoon, everyone. My name's Susie Hall and I work for GamCare. For those of you who don't know already, GamCare are the leading provider of advice, support and information for anybody who's been impacted in any way, shape or form as a result of gambling. We run across the whole of the UK, including Northern Ireland, but things are slightly different in Northern Ireland. So with me this afternoon, I've got Amanda. If Amanda wants to introduce herself.
Yeah, hello everyone. So my name is Amanda and I am one of the education and training leads from Northern Ireland, and I come from the youth programme and I deliver the Young People Gambling Harm Prevention programme, and I deliver this in conjunction with YGAM and other partner agencies throughout the UK. So the programme that I deliver, the Big Deal, has been developed to help young people to make safer choices, prevent gambling related harm and provide early intervention for young people aged 11 to 18. So I don't only just deliver to young people, but I also deliver awareness raising workshops to parents, as well as brief intervention workshops and training to anyone who works with young people. So in a nutshell, that's a bit about me and what I do.
Brilliant, thanks Amanda. So Amanda, I've just noticed, talks incredibly quickly. So do I. Her accent will be a bit easier for you guys to understand than mine is. So I'm going to try and talk a little bit slower than I normally would, and hopefully you can understand, because as you can tell, I'm not from Northern Ireland. So I work on the women's programme. The women's programme was initially set up to try and encourage more women in particular into treatment and to address some of the differences in the way that women experience gambling related harm in particular. That being said, this afternoon's session is going to be fairly general. We're going to talk to you a bit about gambling, about what gambling is, some of the risk factors for gambling which is harmful, and we're also going to talk to you a little bit about what we can provide in terms of support for anybody who is identified as being at risk from the harms that we're going to talk about this afternoon. So I know we've got around about an hour. I'm going to try and aim for around about 50 minutes to leave time for questions at the end. So like Ronan said, please save your questions to the end or stick them in the chat and we'll try and get through as many as we possibly can. So one of the things that we're really keen for people to do is to start conversations about gambling. This is really conversations generally. So that might be conversations over a cup of tea, it might be conversations with friends, it might be conversations with colleagues, with family members, etc., about gambling and about some of the things that can go wrong with it. We hear an awful lot about gambling and how much fun it is, but we very rarely hear about the things which tend to go wrong. We may often refer to gambling as the hidden addiction. It's the one that has very few outward signs that it's happening. So unlike with things like alcohol and drugs, for example, we may use those substances and often there's a physical change, there's a change in behaviour, and we can see things are different. But with gambling, there's very little hint that something's going wrong. Also with gambling and gambling related harm, what we see is a lot of shame and guilt associated. So guilt and shame for the people who are doing it, but also guilt and shame for those around them. So families who try to cover up what's happening, if they're aware of it. Guilt and shame, especially around kind of finances, the way that maybe somebody's behaving. So what we tend to find is that if somebody has an issue with gambling, it's very hard for them to start conversations about the things that they want to talk about. So really we're encouraging people to try and start these conversations with others to try and give those people more or less permission to speak about what's going on. So if we think about those conversations in day-to-day life, it could just be general interest that we've got in somebody, you know, maybe about what they've been doing, things that they've said, things that they've been talking about. Maybe they might have been talking about gambling more often than they have been previous. They might just say things which might just spark an interest. But if we think about professionally, what can we do professionally with the people that we're working with? Can we use a kind of more formal starter question? So when we go in organisations who work with members of the public, this is the kind of thing that we would suggest that they would ask in a more formal setting, perhaps. And that question may go along the lines of, has your gambling or the gambling of somebody close to you had a negative effect on your life? And what we'll find as we go through the session is those negative effects could be many, many things. We could be talking about financial harm, mental health harm, physical health harm. We could be talking about domestic violence situations. We could be talking about coerced money lending. We could be talking about many, many things. But has that gambling had a negative impact? Yeah, so can we start ask those questions? Can we ask people, can we be inquisitive where appropriate? Can we try and make it easier for people to start talking about things? One of the things that we do know is that on average, somebody who gambles in a problematic way would take around about 10 years to access any kind of formalized support for that. And this is something that we'd really like to try and reduce, because in that 10 years, a lot of damage can occur. So let's try and be a little bit more inquisitive. So as we go through, just trying to start thinking about ways that that might happen for you. Okay, so one of the things I think it's important to understand is what it is that we mean by gambling. And this might sound a bit like I'm teaching my granny how to suck eggs, a little bit basic, but I think what we'll find in just a minute is that there's many, many gambling activities that we might partake in, which we might not think of as gambling. So if we think about our definition of gambling would be to take part in some kind of activity where there's an element of risk or chance involved. And usually what we would do is we would put down some kind of stake, which is usually money, but not always, on the outcome of that event. So this might be something like a horse race, it might be something like the turn of a card, it might be like a lottery. Yeah, so we might put the lottery numbers on and hope that those numbers are the ones that come out in the draw. There's a chance that we could win, and depending on what activity we're doing, that chance can be higher or lower than others. But there's also a chance that we could lose. And that's what makes it a gamble. That's what makes it fun, yeah, for most people. So a gamble is something where we're risking something of value. It could be money, but it could be other things as well, on an event where the outcome of that event is uncertain. There's an element of chance involved. When we're thinking about harmful gambling, this would be gambling where there's a compulsion, or we're compelled to continue to gamble, even when we may be feeling harm from that gambling. So we might start to feel some of the gambling related harms that we're going to talk about in just a minute. Or it might very well be the case that we want to stop gambling, but there's something which doesn't allow it to do that. So this gambling is now gambling which has gone beyond just being fun and a bit of a laugh, and it's turned into something else. So it's something which now overtakes other things in our life. So we may now spend money on gambling, which previously we may have spent on essentials like food, heat, electric, etc. We might spend time on gambling that we previously may have spent with friends and family. And I want you to think about more than just the outcome of the gambling itself, which makes it harmful or not. So it would be very simplistic to just think about gambling where we lose as being the gambling which is harmful. But sometimes we can just as much get a situation where we might gamble and win, and that win can cause as much harm as a loss could. So I'll give you an example of that. We may have somebody who gambles, who is compulsive about that gambling, who wants to stop but can't. What that win might do is, to them, it might justify that what they've been doing is then correct, because we knew that we were waiting for that winning streak to start. And that may then exacerbate the gambling which has already taken place. It may encourage that gambling to continue. It may give somebody the ability to continue to gamble because now they have the funds to be able to do it. And all of the time when they're gambling, it's causing harm, because it's not just about money that they've lost, but it's about time that they spend away from family. It's about the lies that they tell to the other half about where they are and what they're doing. It's about the idea that now everybody else should be happy about the gambling because now I've won. Yeah, so it's not just the gamble itself, it's not the outcome of the gamble, it's the act of the gambling which is causing the harm. Yeah. And then finally, if we think about what gambling-related harms look like, essentially, these are the harms which are felt by anybody because of that gambling. The majority of these harms will fall into one of three categories, either finance-related or resource-related. Those harms might be to do with health, both physical and mental health, or they might be to do with the relationships that we have with other people. And I want you to just start thinking about how far that reach of that harm might go. Are we just talking about the person who's gambling? Are we talking about the person who's gambling's friends and family? Are we talking about neighbours, friends, colleagues at work? Or are we talking about the impact that it has on wider society as a whole? Are we thinking about the police force that has to deal with crime that somebody might commit because they're gambling? Are we thinking about the court system that has to deal with that person's crime that they've committed because they're gambling? Are we talking about people who are fraudulently claiming benefits from gambling? Are we talking about people whose insurance premiums have gone up because somebody's been gambling and has stole from them? Are we talking about the domestic violence incidents that are happening because of gambling? So just think about how far that harm might be felt. It's not just the person who's gambling that's going to feel it, it's those around them and those around them further again. So on the screen now, we've got some typical kinds of gambling activities that we might think about. Some of them more obvious than others. So there's one on the bottom right there I'm going to let Amanda talk about in just a minute, along with some of the others. But these would typically be what we would think about as gambling type activities, kind of lotteries, slot machines, sports betting, etc. If we're thinking about activities which tend to cause the most harm in terms of somebody being compulsive, those kinds of activities would tend to be what we would refer to as fast and frequent. So gambling where we can do the same activity again and again and again without any kind of real natural break. And what that allows us to do is kind of get into that rhythm of gambling. There's no kind of pause in it. We haven't got time to stand back and think about what it is that we're actually doing. We become consumed by it. So think about somebody stood at a slot machine, pressing a button. We can do that for a long, long time. We can get consumed by it. Every time we press, we're waiting for those wheels to spin around. And every time it doesn't come out in our favour, we're compelled to press that button again because next time it's going to be different. So anything which is fast and frequent. But we also need to think about the harms that may be caused by something like the National Lottery. So if we think about scratch cards, fast and frequent, we see a lot of people who become addicted to scratch cards. But think about something like the National Lottery draw. Think about somebody who puts the same numbers on every week. Maybe it started off, with one draw a week or whatever. Then it goes on to multiple draws. We might put those on different lotteries during the week. Now we're in a position where, in our mind, if we don't put the lottery numbers on that we've put on every week, what happens if those lottery numbers come up this week? So we can't really afford to put it on, but we feel compelled to put it on. We might think, oh, this week I'm short at the end of the month, but I put my lottery on by direct debit, or I want to roll over, and if I don't put my numbers on the jackpot, what happens if my numbers come up? So we might not have the money to be able to do it without feeling short, but we're compelled to do it because we've got that fear of missing out. So anything you want to add there, Amanda?
Okay, yeah. Do you want me to move on to?
Yeah, do you want to talk about the loot boxes?
I absolutely can, yeah.
Yeah, because just to say, it's not only adults that we think about here, we also think about children and young people.
Absolutely. So most young people nowadays don't take part in traditional forms of gambling, like the lottery, scratch cards, or roulettes, those type of things. But however, gambling related activities have become very common in most of the online games that young people are now playing online. We have turned to a society where a lot of our young people do play online, and you've got games like Fortnite and FIFA, and we're starting to see that there's some activities within those games which could be considered gambling. So a study by the Gambling Commission in 2019 found that 81% of under 18s game online, and 44% of those surveyed have spent their own money on in-game items. And this is the type of stuff that I would deliver in the Young People's Gambling Harm Prevention workshop. So Susie, do you have a slide about? Yeah, perfect. Just go on to that. So I'm going to talk about some of the ways that young people can experience gambling related activities on the video games that they're playing. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is freemium games. And this term freemium is used to describe games that are free to play, but require you to spend money to unlock certain features within the game. So it's basically where the companies are giving the game away for free, but in order for you to progress further or more quickly in the game, the player needs to spend more money on either virtual items or currency in order to buy downloadable digital content. Often the mechanics behind these games are designed to get the player to spend more money and to entice us back with great rewards in order to keep us playing. And they offer limited time offer rewards as well. So, you know, going to miss out on this deal, to pay your 89p now before you miss it. If you miss it, then it's gone. So some examples of freemium games are Candy Crush, which is a game that I'm very familiar with and a game that I love. I don't pay for downloadable digital content, but again, I'm very aware of how this game works and the mechanisms that are in it in order to encourage and entice us to spend money. You've got Fortnite, League of Legends, and Clash of Clans. And like I say, I deliver this workshop to young people in schools, youth clubs, basically anywhere where young people hang out. And these are all games that young people are now familiar with. So these types of games have a pay to win business model. So you pay to get a better gaming experience. They play on our sense of frustration and they encourage us to buy more. So for example, you might have 10 really easy levels and then you get one level and you get stuck on that level. And after 20 tries, you're frustrated, and it encourages the player to buy certain features to unlock, like I said, unlock certain features. And they play on our sense of FOMO, so that fear of missing out. And so this is something that I've certainly seen with the young people that I've delivered this to. You know, in games of Fortnite, they say that, you know, you can identify the newest players because they don't have the good stuff. So there's those pressures, to encourage young people to buy these items online. These aren't gambling in themselves, but I suppose that mentality that I must pay money in order to play the game. And there are dangers around this, these as well. You know, the games are built around loot boxes and downloadable digital content, which costs the player money. Which I'll then move on to loot boxes, which is the major thing that we are seeing young people doing whilst playing games online. So just to let you know what a loot box is, it is a reward paid by credits earned within a game or purchased with real world money. So typically a loot box is an in-game item which will reward you with a random prize. And if we remember back to Susie's definition of gambling, we can see that loot boxes do fall within that gambling definition. So within some games, you have, like I say, the chance to use your credits that you've earned within the game or actually using your own world money to unlock a box, which is often called a loot box or a loot crate, or if you're playing FIFA, a FIFA pack, and so on. And the key word in loot boxes are the item that you will receive is random. So you don't know what you're going to receive once you've what's in that box until you've purchased and opened the box, which adds to that excitement and gives us a rise in that hormone dopamine, which is the key chemical in terms of behavioral addiction. So to make it a bit easier for you to understand what a loot box is, it's similar to the element of a Kinder egg. So you buy a chocolate egg and inside it is a toy. You don't know what you're going to get until you've opened it. So loot boxes are very, very similar. However, it's not a physical item like an egg, the chocolate egg that you can eat, or the toy, but it's actually a virtual item. So just depending on the game that you're playing, it could be something that'll improve how the game is played, or it could be something which is completely cosmetic. So like I say, depending on the game that you're playing, you will get different items. So it could be something cosmetic like an outfit or a skin for a weapon or a gun, which will basically only change how the item looks. It will not help you progress any further within the game, but it'll change, I suppose, the feel and look of the game. Or it could be something like a stat that'll help the player to advance in the game, that maybe like a new character or a piece of equipment. The loot box may contain an item that is of value, but there is also that risk that it might be worthless, okay? Some items are rarer than others, and some items can actually be worth more and more money in some cases outside of the game. And research has been conducted and has found that, you know, young people are playing games online. Young people, I think the stats in 2019 found that 93% of young people regularly play games that have loot boxes within them. And 49% of those surveyed believe that online video games are only fun whenever they spend their own money to open these loot boxes. So loot boxes are a thing. Young people are spending money to buy them. And people might say, well, how is it gambling? I suppose it's gambling in the sense that you're risking something of value. And that is not just the money that you're using, but also the time that you're spending in the games. And the item that you're receiving is at random. So you don't know what you're going to get. And the gambling definition does state that anything that falls within that definition can be classified as gambling. However, the UK government does not see loot boxes as a form of gambling, just to put it out there, but they do say that it can encourage young people to have multiple buys, but also that emotional response that a person gets whilst they're waiting to see if they have won or what they've got in the box is very, very similar to gambling activity. Then you've got things like skins betting as well, which is I suppose an attachment on the loot boxes, and basically it involves taking those random virtual items that you've obtained from the loot boxes and taking them outside of the game and trading your skins for virtual chips and then betting them in gambling style sites. I'll not go into too much detail because it's it can be pretty much a minefield before we start getting into it. But if there's anything that I do talk about in today's workshop, like I say, I do offer parents workshops, so I can certainly come in and deliver a parent workshop to keep all us parents up to date, to let us know what is going on and what is out there in terms of loot boxes and skins betting as well. But then one thing that I do want to have a chat about before I move on, before me and Susie move on, is actually esports, because esports are is something that isn't overly huge, but it's something that we are certainly seeing a rise in and something which is of concern. So popular games like FIFA, Fortnite and League of Legends are becoming increasingly popular on a popular level. So it's basically where the best players in the world compete against one another as, like I say, a form of professional competition, compete against one another in packed out arenas or online. Millions of viewers across the world are watching to see, you know, who's going to win this competition, which means that gambling on esports has become increasingly popular, and it has something that has risen, especially during lockdown. So like I said, it is relatively small in terms of other forms of betting in the UK, but it is something that we are certainly seeing a rise in. So from lockdown, we have seen there has been a rise of 3,000% of esports betting, which has made it become, you know, a very viable gambling alternative to sport, which had stopped during lockdown. Like I said, it is an area of concern, and there's more people betting on it. Young people are fans of these professional players. They may be watching them on YouTube or social media, so they're becoming, you know, involved in it, and they can also bet on this as well. And betting, as we know, is gambling. And yeah, so a lot of the sites that young people are gambling on, they come from unregulated markets. So if you lose or you win and nobody pays out, then you've nobody to go back and get your money back from. And also there's nowhere to say that you're over the age of 18, except for a little tick box at the bottom to say that you're over 18. So basically anyone can go onto these sites and place a bet on their most popular esports. So just that's me in a nutshell, and just to let you know that this is how young people are experiencing gambling online. Yes, there are young people who still do the traditional forms of gambling, but this is something that we are seeing certainly more and more of within the young people that we work with and deliver to. Susie?
Well, thanks, Amanda. Yeah, just to say that there's estimated around 55,000 children under the age of 16 who would meet the criteria for being classified as a problem gambler, which is an incredibly worrying statistic, I think.
Absolutely.
So if we think about gambling, the kinds of gambling that we're doing, we often find useful to think about gambling as occurring along the continuum. And what we can see from this continuum is that there's an arrow on both ends. So hopefully what this suggests is that we can move along, we continue in one direction, but we can also move back, given the right set of circumstances. So at one end of this continuum, we're looking at gambling, which is very much in control. And to be fair, this is where the vast majority of people who gamble would sit. So there's an estimated, the estimate for the UK as a whole would be something like 98% of the UK population would fit into this end of the continuum. So we're looking at the vast majority of people. And this is where that gambling is in control. We have spending limits. And I think it's always useful to think about the money that we used to gamble with, thinking about that as money that we've spent rather than money that we've lost. When we start to think about it as money that we've lost, I would just say to you, what happens when you lose something? When we lose something, we try to find it. When we spend something, we accept that it's gone. So we spend money at the pub, or if we spend money at the cinema, we would never go back to the pub or the cinema to say, I need my money back. But if we go into a bookmakers and we put 50 quid on the 440 at Epsom and we lose, there's always the temptation to try and win back what we've lost. What happens then as we get into this cycle? We increase that risk of that gambling. We start to do things like chasing losses. So we've gambled, we've lost money in our mind. So now we want to try and win that money back. So we invest more money, we spend more money trying to win back what we've lost. We may very well win back some of what we've lost, but generally then what will happen is that we spend that money again trying to win back the rest of what we've lost. Or we now, like I said before, thinking we're ahead, now we're onto a winning streak, our luck's changed, so we'll keep going. And what invariably happens is we end up losing more money. We may increase the frequency with which we gamble, so we do it more often. We may diversify the kinds of gambling that we're doing. So we may start off on one activity, say horse racing. We might move on to things like slot machines. It might be that we go from online bingo sites to online casino sites. So we're diversifying the kinds of gambling that we're doing. We may start at this point hiding what we're doing from loved ones. We may start lying about what we're doing, where we're going, where money's gone to, that kind of thing. And people may at this point start to see some behavioural changes. We may become withdrawn, bad-tempered, etc. At this point, we're not actually meeting the criteria to be classified as problem or harmful gamblers, but certainly we're starting to feel the impacts of that gambling. If we get to this stage, this problematic end, we're now at that point where criminality becomes a possibility, where we're looking for sources of money to be able to gamble with. That may come from borrowing. It may come from legitimate sources to start off with, but certainly it could end up with things like coercive behaviours, loan sharks, not paying other essential bills so we can gamble with the money that we've got. We could now be thinking about gambling 24 hours a day. So think about when we go to sleep, when we wake up, when we're at work. Work might start to be impacted. Relationships are certainly being impacted. But most worryingly for us is that the increased risk from suicidal harm and ideation is increased more with gambling than it is with any other addiction. So if we're thinking about gambling with suicides within the UK, there's an organisation called Gambling with Lives, and they estimate that in the UK, every single day, there's at least one person takes their own life as the direct result of gambling. So that's one person at least a day. Now, this is very hard to kind of guess or quantify because very rarely on a death certificate will the cause of death be suicide because of gambling. But when we look at what's been happening in people's lives, it's very clear often to see that the emotional disturbance that somebody's been experiencing very definitely comes from that gambling type behaviour. If we think about the numbers here, we're talking about generally it's accepted 0.5 to 0.7% of the population would fall into this problematic category of gambling. Talking around about 400,000, maybe a bit more. It doesn't sound like that many people, but actually the harm from that gambling is felt by many, many more people. It's suggested that for every one gambler in the UK, we would expect to see something between 6 and 10 other people who are directly impacted. Around about 7% of the UK population. So now with the people who are fit that criteria for problematic gambling, all of those who are at increased risk where that harm's being felt, and all of those people who are being impacted, we're talking about millions and millions of people in the UK being impacted as a result of gambling. And this is why we need to start having those conversations. What I would say is that just as it's possible to move along that continuum from in control to problematic, it's also possible to move back along that continuum and get that gambling back under control or stop it altogether. We can only do this if people recognise that there's a problem and are willing to accept the support which can be offered. So there is a lot of support out there. We're going to talk about that a little bit later on. But it is possible to do it. We have a very good success rate with people who want to stop gambling or reduce the gambling. So it is possible, but we need to help people to recognise that a lot of the harm that's been caused is due to gambling and not pass it off as something else. It would be very easy to think about financial harm, for example, as being just about the cost of living crisis or about not earning enough money from work. Or there's a lot of reasons why we might feel financial harm, but if one of those financial harms comes from gambling and we never address the gambling, then we never get that financial harm under control. Okay, how are we doing? Is this one of your slides, Amanda? Yes, I think it is. Yeah. You're on mute.
Told you there's always something, isn't there? Yep. So we're now going to look at a bit about gambling in Northern Ireland because it is a bit different from the rest of the UK. So our gambling law is very old, it's very complex, and it's very much out of date. So therefore it is currently under review. So in May 2021, the Minister of Communities announced plans for a two-phase review of Northern Ireland's existing gambling laws. As prior to this, our law was last updated in 1985. Like I say, I mean, it's very old and it was very much out of date, and it hadn't been updated to emerging trends, including the internet, the use of mobile phones, and especially the emergence of online gambling. So the first phase was completed in May of this year. Not huge changes, but we did see some changes, and I suppose a step in the right direction of protecting those who are harmed because of gambling. Phase 2 will be a much longer phase, and it'll include completing a new framework which will regulate online gambling, which I'll talk about as we go through this slide, including gaming machines, which is a huge area of concern here in Northern Ireland, as well as creating a code of practice for the industry as well. So in Northern Ireland, like I say, very much old, complex, and despite its review, it's still out of date. So our current gambling laws are once were regulated under the Betting, Gaming, Lotteries and Amusements NI Order of 1985, and it's been amended by the Betting, Gaming, Lotteries and Amusements Amended Act in Northern Ireland 2022. And it regulates betting on racetracks, bookmakers, the use and supply of gaming machines, gaming and bingo halls, small scale amusements with prizes, lotteries other than the National Lottery. And one of the changes that did come about from this bill is that betting shops are now able to open on Sundays and Good Friday. So Susie, prior to this being passed in April, May time there, the bookies weren't allowed to open on Sundays or Good Friday. However, they will still have to close on Christmas Day. And it has now become an offence for anyone to allow anyone under the age of 18 to use gaming machines, slot machines, fruit machines, those type of machines, high stake machines as well. So anyone found guilty of this offence will face 6 months in prison. And also a mandatory levy of 1% on licenses will be introduced, and this will be to fund treatment for addiction, as well as a code of practice for those holding licenses, and any company that fails to protect customers could lose their betting license. So that's just a few things that have been updated, but in terms of what has remained the same. So let me see what I can. Susie, can you click along to that? Yeah, perfect, got it up there, brilliant. Thank you. So the Department of Communities is responsible for setting the overall regulatory framework for gambling, and has the power to publish industry codes of practice, like I said. The courts and the district councils certify gambling activities, and they are the ones who determine if an offence or breaches have been made. But the responsibility for enforcing gambling law lies with the Police Service of Northern Ireland, so the PSNI. They don't have time to constantly monitor what's going on in the industry or inspect, like I say, the gambling industry in Northern Ireland, but hopefully this is something that we'll see change as part of the review. So in Northern Ireland, we don't have a regulator here, like the rest of the UK and Ireland. So anyone who gambles in Northern Ireland is not protected if the Northern Ireland gambling operator refuses to pay out. So in Northern Ireland, we have what's called a gentleman's style agreement set up in the bookies. So if you win a large amount of money and the bookies can't pay out, they don't have to pay out. They can just say, see you later, and close your accounts down. And my brother once worked in the bookmakers and told me how local bookmakers and told me how often this actually does happen. But Northern Ireland Communities Committee has argued that there needs to be a dedicated regulator here in Northern Ireland to protect those who are gambling. Our law here is a bit hazy around fixed odds betting terminals, which we call the crack cocaine in the gambling industry because they're so highly addictive. But they're very much a grey area here in Northern Ireland because on average, £500 million is spent on fixed odds betting terminals annually. So it brings about a huge amount of revenue. So it is massively overlooked. Like I did say, the amended bill has stated that it is now against the law for anyone to allow anyone under the age of 18 to use a gaming machine, and also the maximum stake has been slashed from £100 to £2. This has been a voluntary act from some Northern Ireland bookmakers and not across the board, and hasn't been made law, but maybe that's something that we will see in terms of changes in the next part of the review. The current law here in Northern Ireland means that online gambling is technically illegal. So Northern Ireland hasn't caught up with emerging technology. So like I say, this bill was introduced in 1985. The internet wasn't a thing. We didn't have our mobile phones. So the law is very much outdated in terms of online gambling. So in Northern Ireland, it is illegal to gamble online. So none of the gambling operators here in Northern Ireland, so you've got Sean Graham, Tolls, McLean's, Boyles, those sorts of things, they're not allowed to offer online gambling services. So anyone in Northern Ireland who's wanting to gamble online, they have to basically gamble with operators in the UK and or Ireland as well. So Northern Ireland doesn't have casinos. Again, that's because of the law in 1985 made casinos a bit illegal. But we do have arcades here, adult arcades, which do offer a gambling casino style experience, but the casinos aren't a thing here. So we don't have any legal casinos here, but I have heard that there is potential for a few illegal casinos about the towns. But all you need to do is basically go across the border and you'll have access to casinos because they are legal across the border. And suppose Susie was saying about the figures of people who are affected by gambling and the statistics for harmful gamblers. In Northern Ireland, we have the highest rate of harmful gambling than anywhere else in the UK. So Northern Ireland is 4 times higher than any other region in the UK and 3 times higher than that of the Republic of Ireland. And that was a study found by the Department of Communities in 2016. Yeah, we have the highest rate of harmful gambling, yet we have less in terms of support and treatment and less protection in place for those who are harmfully gambling and those who are affected by the gambling of someone else as well. So hopefully we do start to see some changes in phase 2. And this study also found that 3 out of 4 adults have taken part in some form of gambling. So very familiar with gambling here in Northern Ireland. So our stats, 2% of adults are harmfully gambling, but it's estimated that 6 to 10 people are impacted by someone else's gambling, which estimates that about 360,000 people in Northern Ireland are affected by gambling harms. Like I say, this was research that was taken in 2016. We're 6 years down the line. There's been a huge rise in online gambling, and especially we've had COVID in the mix. So this number could be a lot higher. GamCare have commissioned a piece of work around gambling in Northern Ireland. So hopefully we get those results in sooner rather than later to give us a bit of an indication of the stats. But our helpline have certainly seen an increase in calls of people from Northern Ireland who are experiencing gambling related harm during COVID, especially due to boredom, the betting shops being closed, and just basically people turning to online gambling. So in a nutshell, there is some laws, are the gambling laws in Northern Ireland.
Yeah, I thought the rest of the UK's gambling laws were out of date until Amanda enlightened us on what's going on in Northern Ireland. So yeah, mobile technology is taking great leaps. Even in the rest of the UK, our gambling regulation isn't anywhere near where it should be, to do with online and mobile technology, which essentially has opened bookmakers and casinos 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So yeah. Okay, just to give you all a quick break, I'm really keen just to show you this really quick video from a woman called Kelly. And Kelly's just going to talk a little bit about her experience of gambling. So I just really want you to listen to what Kelly says about things like why did she get started and some of the impacts that gambling had on her. So I'm just going to play this video. I hope everybody can hear it. Go.
Just thought, I can't imagine that I'd get up one day and I don't gamble. I couldn't see how it was possible. I started using online bingo sites, I think as a sort of way of escaping reality, and then moved over to the slots on the bingo sites, which I think was my downfall. And quickly, within 6 months, I'd racked up £10,500 on one credit card, which I then went on to get a further 5 credit cards, totalling over £30,000. Gambling is the be all and end all, and it is the most important thing in your life at the time, that you've got to be on there 24/7, you've got to be gambling, and you lose touch with reality, and the money's not money, it's just digits on a screen. I was suicidal. I used to think, I'll get in the car and I'll just drive into a tree, I'll just end it, because you see that as the only way out. I'd gone to town one day and I put a £1,600 overdraft on one of our accounts, and I come home and spent that within an hour. So out of sheer frustration, anger, guilt, rage really, I snapped up the cash card to the account and I started scratching away at my wrists. It was superficial, it drew blood, which then sort of prompted me to go to the doctors then. My partner found an article in the local paper for a counselling trust, and I did a 12-week talking therapy, which I think was the start of help.
So that's Kelly, just very quickly, because I am really conscious of time. We often use this Kelly video as a really good example of how gambling can evolve from something which is fun into something which is a lot less fun. So Kelly's really quite classic in terms of, she talks very much about using that gambling as an escape from reality. If we think about that telescoping or that diversifying in that gambling, Kelly starts off in online bingo and she moves on to slot machines. And then I think one of the things that tends to shock people a lot is the fact that Kelly can have £30,000 worth of debt on credit cards. This video, I mean, Kelly was gambling before the ban came in on using credit cards to gamble with in the UK. But you can have a £30,000 debt already. She can then go and get another £1,600 from the bank, which is then able to spend within 1 hour. So if we think about other addictive behaviours, it would be very difficult, for example, to spend that much money if we were drinking alcohol or taking drugs within that period of time. And if we think about gambling in terms of its ability to self-limit, if somebody had £5,000 in the pocket, it would be very difficult if they were alcohol dependent to spend that in one go on alcohol. But if you have somebody who's gambling compulsively and is unable to stop, that £5,000 could be gone in as little as 20 seconds. So I was doing some work on the helpline not so long ago, and was talking to a guy who had lost £20,000 in 20 seconds betting on an online casino. So just bear that in mind as we go through. So I just want to talk to you a little bit now about some of the risks involved with problem gambling. I always like to make point out a little bit of a caveat. I'll say a little bit of a caveat before we start with these risks. Sometimes people's gambling just gets out of hand. Yeah, sometimes it's one or two bad decisions that we make, and before we know it, we're kind of in that cycle of wins and losses, chasing losses, making bad decision after bad decision, going down that rabbit hole to the ultimate point where that gambling is really problematic and compulsive. But for some people, there's outside influences in life which may make them most susceptible to making those decisions. So when we talk to people who have identified as somebody who is compulsive or is gambling in a harmful way, these are things which we often find have in common. So I don't know if anybody remembers when Kelly said just a couple of minutes ago there that she started